government eavesdrop on their customers without court permissions.
Folks are going nuts over this in England.
After the 7/7 bombings, the government had to act decisively to prevent violent extremism and stem the rise of Generation Jihad.
Just as dealing with any infection, I think it's a generation of treatment to prevent the infection spreading. And I think that that will take us probably 20 years.
If we use a standard actuary employed by major insurance companies to calculate the probability of these events coinciding in a 10-year mean, we learn that the probability of this happening is greater than 1.
Four Lions, a very funny film about 4 Islamic terrorists. It was made in Sheffield, just like the steel. Yeah. And it was buffoonish. And we had a laughable MI5 making all sorts of mistakes. But the success of that film was that it reinforced the perception in the minds of the British public that we have a threat from Islamic terrorists. Even if some of them on the surface can be nice people, a bit buffoonish, who've got aspirations for the rubber dinghy rapids in Alton Towers. But really, the whole thing is based on a massive deceit. And it's fooling the British public. And the British public need to wake up and realise that it's all part of a mind control system.
5 fabrications. They were just ordinary, normal lads, and they were deeply, utterly clueless about how to make explosives. I mean, there's absolutely no reason to believe they have a clue about how to put a bomb together.
And we can no longer tolerate falsehood and the evil behind state crimes against democracy and the terrorism acts that have succeeded and fooled the masses. Wake up, masses.
Bloody hell, Nick, that's... You know the odds of that happening?
The number you have reached is not in service. This is a recording.
$100,000 million to 1 is incredible.
That's one thing this reminds me of.
What's that, mate?
On July the 7th, when Peter Power claimed to be having a terror drill on just the same 3 tube stations, on just the same time in the morning, on just the same date of July the 7th, and people did the calculation. It was about what we've just seen here.
We're talking about the 3 tube stations. Exact time?
1 in a billion. Yeah, he was pretty well exact.
And he predicted that?
He was doing it, not just predicted, but they were doing it there at that time.
Exactly, when the bombs went off?
This astronomical level of improbability.
I'll have to look into that, Nick.
I wonder whether it could indicate something wasn't right about the government story. Well, I'm tired of tossing these coins. Let's have a game of cards, Tony. It's a nice summer day.
You're bored now with
nice summer afternoon.
Yeah, what do you want to play?
Well, I like the odd game of Snap now and then.
Oh, that's my favourite game too.
Right.
Good shuffle. Snap!
You had a missed call.
Tea, gentlemen?
Oh, Belinda, thank you. Belinda, what are you doing? Why have you got these glasses on? And what's that?
Well, this is Lady Justice Hallett, who's very important in the justice system of this country.
Really?
A symbol of justice, if you like, and I'm a campaigner for justice.
And at this time of night, why are you wearing specs?
Ah, these are the mystery glasses, you see, because these have helped me see what's really going on. Would you like to try?
Nick? I can't believe it.
What about?
Look at these cards.
That's just a pack of cards, Tony.
No, put these glasses on, you see that. 7-7's an inside job.
Well, I don't know what you mean.
False flag terror.
Good Lord.
Everything's in a different light, Nick.
See what I mean?
Dead certain, Nick.
I can see it now.
When we look at what happened at 9/11, the official version of 9/11 is still believed. I want to put to the British people just how ridiculous they are in actually believing that. Those twin towers fell in free fall speed. Building 7 went down in 7 seconds and wasn't even hit by a plane.
10 years after the event, we still haven't got a single politician in this country who's prepared to tell the truth about 9/11, have we?
And 9/11 and 7/7 are examples of this new world order at work. We've got to get to the truth. It's only the truth that will set us free. Whatever counter-terrorism strategy is put in place by the government, it will not heal relationships with our Muslim communities and brothers and sisters. It will not heal issues in the Middle East until we actually come clean and repent for what we have done as a nation over the 9/11, 7/7, our occupation illegal in Afghanistan and Iraq, which was done under false pretenses.
Can you imagine this country being governed without an enemy? I mean, if they said, look, this is fabricated by elements within our own government and the CIA and maybe Mossad, that we don't have a wicked Muslim terrorists, we don't need to invade their nations, would that mean Britain would have to live without having an enemy? I mean,
well, yeah.
Would that imply some spiritual awakening?
I think there needs to be some awakening. Whether it's spiritual or not is another issue.
But does that imply evil that is too dreadful to be thinkable?
I'm afraid so. People are waking up, and there's only a small percentage of people who are willing to face up to the truth and confront it. Tony Blair. In 2005, Tony Blair said it would be a ludicrous diversion to have an inquiry into the London bombings. In 2005, Tony Blair said that this was carried out in the name of Islam. This was before there was any evidence to suggest as much. This was actually on the same day. Tony Blair sent us to war in Afghanistan and Iraq based on the lies being the weapons of mass destruction that never were in Iraq.
Peter Power, the czar of terror drills. Right after July the 7th, on the afternoon, what did he do? He went on TV saying, oh, fancy that.
Today we were running an exercise, and the most peculiar thing was we based our scenario on the simultaneous attacks on the underground and mainline station.
I was doing a terror drill rehearsal with the same 3 underground stations the very same time, 9 o'clock in the morning.
So we had to suddenly switch an exercise from fictional to real.
Oh, our team had to go live.
That's right. You were actually working today on an exercise that envisioned virtually this scenario.
Almost precisely. And we chose a scenario with their assistance which is based on a terrorist attack because they're very close to a property occupied by Jewish businessmen. And I've still got the...
I was going to say, how extraordinary today must feel for you as it unfolds. You mentioned a few...
Ace of Clubs, Sir Ian Blair, Metropolitan Police Commissioner at the time of the London bombings. Ian Blair was famous a few days later after these bombings for saying we have 4 miserable bombers before we even had a clue who had actually done this. He was almost famous for the Charles John Lamanzes affair where he lied and covered it up. Sir Ian Blair demonstrated his clear prejudicial views by saying the threat from Islamic terrorism is greater than ever, including the Second World War.
Kingstar demolition. It was the van parked right next to the 30 bus before it blew up, and it remained there after it blew up. Specialised in controlled demolition. There's no centre in London for Kingstar. It had to come quite a way to be there, and it just looked very, very conspicuous.
Jack of Spades, senior police officers. I'm going to mention 3. Andy Hyman profited from, as a Metropolitan Police officer, profited from making a book that was based on the lies of the July the 7th bombings. Sir Norman Betterson, ACPO officer in charge of Prevent, West Yorkshire Police former officer, talking on BBC Generation Jihad about a generation of jihadists based on the lies of the London bombings. And Meredith Hughes, my own former chief constable at the time of the London bombings. Well, what had he got to do with it? Well, he was in Gleneagles managing the post-London bombings management strategy. There were hoax bombings in his own police force area just the days prior to and after July the 7th.
Richard Jones, key witness for the whole suicide bomber story. He seeded the suicide bomber story the very day after. Actually, there he was on the TV, in the newspapers, giving testimony, claiming that he was on the 30 bus. And he gave impossible, ever-changing stories about Hasib Hussain downstairs, fiddling with his rucksack, and the trousers he was wearing, the appearance was totally different from what we later gathered. And later on, Hasib Hussain was upstairs, not downstairs. Everything was wrong with his story.
Came from a Mr. Richard Jones, who claims to have seen a man fiddling with his bag on the bottom floor of the number 30 bus. He described the man he saw as clean-shaven and wearing light brown trousers and a light brown top. So obviously he wasn't talking about Hussain.
If he was on the bus, he probably got off just before, as he got into Tavistock Square. He wasn't. I don't think he was on the bus when it blew up.
There was screaming all about. All you could see was the 30 on the back of the bus. All you could see was the 30 on the back of the bus. The 30 on the back of the bus. Yes, I did work in an explosives factory. I served my apprenticeship there for 5 years, from 1960 to 65.
BBC Panorama, May 2004. Gavin Hessler, Peter Power, Michael Portillo, to name a few. The template for the London bombings were the dress rehearsal with 3 underground explosions and 1 overground explosion simulated. That was the dress rehearsal of what was to come.
Government, intelligence, emergencies, disasters and planning. They are here to give it to us straight. This is the kind of terrorist attack the government repeatedly says is going to happen.
Jack Straw is our King of Diamonds, Britain's Foreign Secretary. After the 7/7 event, the terrible London bombings, he comes out and says this event bears all the hallmarks of Al-Qaeda. And that becomes a meme that echoes through Whitehall and echoes through the media, okay? And get this, on the Panorama programme, the May previous to the London bombings in 2004, the actor for Britain's Foreign Secretary says exactly the same thing. When the bombers go off in the London Underground in the dress rehearsal on Panorama, this bears the hallmarks of Al-Qaeda.
Jack of Diamonds, our post-Prime Ministers, 2005. That's none other than Gordon Brown and David Cameron. Why do I name them? 6 years, 7 years on, and we still haven't had a trial to prove who is guilty of the London bombings. We've had a whitewash of an inquiry, and we have a terror threat and a counter-terrorism strategy that is putrid, but it's the responsibility of all Prime Ministers.
Rachel North, Queen of Diamonds. She quickly became the main government spokesperson for the London bombings, produced at any public event for the media, and she said she was on the front coach of the Piccadilly line. Was she really? Well, she said she had some glass in her wrist from the impact, the implosion of the glass. Did she? Well, hard to find anyone who would confirm that. She was a victim. She gave a public face and a sense of credibility to the official story.
9 of clubs. The Home Office report, the official count of the London bombings that came out in 2006. 3 things mainly wrong with it. It was anonymous, it was inept, and it was wholly inaccurate.
Wait a moment. Let's notice that Home Office report, 1 year after the event, May 2006, still had the 7:40 train. Now, we'd all ascertained it had been cancelled. I actually went up to Luton and made the discovery that that 7:40 train wasn't running that morning. That was the perfect crime conceived, and that was the flaw in the perfect crime. There was no 7:40 train. 1 month after the official government report, the Home Secretary announced in the Commons, he apologised, they got it all wrong, there was no 7:40 train. Gosh, how could they have got all that wrong? Allegedly, the 4 young men turn up there to get on the train. Allegedly, about 7:22, they go through the lower door entrance to Luton Station, and allegedly they get the 7:40 train. And then the official government report talks about witnesses on the 7:40 train who saw them with their big bulky rucksacks, and then they got off at King's Cross.
Well, whoops, there wasn't any such train, and all of those trains were delayed at least 25 minutes, and that really threw a spanner in the works, and nobody's now sure what train they got onto.
3 of spades, miscarriages of justice. The British record regarding terrorism is appalling. Typically the Birmingham 6, the Guildford 4 and the Maguire 7. But latterly, after 9/11 and 7/7, we've had the miscarriages of justice against Muslims. People like Rizwan Dittar from Halifax and Bilal Muhammad, who were just imprisoned for being decent lads who've got a conscience and oppose the British foreign strategy in the Middle East. The imprisonment of Muad'Dib, 151 days, that coincided with the Lady Justice Hallett's inquiry. Nottingham University, Professor Rob Thornton, and 2 students who've been mistreated. A PhD student, Rizwan Sabir, who actually was downloading open source information, CIA documentation on the Terrorist Act, and then gets 9 days imprisonment. Professor Rob Thornton comes to his defence and is made a pariah. We've got to look at our legislation because it is demonising the Muslims. And that's not good enough.
Lady Justice Hallett, Queen of Spades. She presided with great decorum over the 5-month inquest which we had in 2010-11. Now, an inquest ascertains the cause of death, but hang on, halfway through the inquest, turn out there weren't any post-mortems. Oh gosh, fancy that. The biggest attack on London since the Blitz, and nobody did any post-mortems. It took all of her decorum and gravitas to keep it going as an inquest with hundreds of witnesses and a smarmy official lawyer to make sure nobody got off the track of what they were supposed to say, help the odd fake witness along. I think she managed that job quite well, but it wasn't justice.
4 of spades. Draconian legislation and erosion of our civil liberties. Just prior to the London bombings, we had the Inquiries Act of 2005 coming up, which really gave government full control of how they would manage inquiries, such as the investigations into what really happened in London in the London bombings. But prior to that, we'd had the Terrorism Act from 2000, and we've also had the Terrorism Act updated in 2006. And all these legislations that are coming in, issues such as extradition to the United States of America, are all meant as an erosion of our civil liberties.
Our Jack of Clubs, Bob Kiley, who was appointed head of London Transport by Red Ken a couple of years before the London bombings. He was presently a member of the Council for Foreign Relations. That's America's top policy-making organisation. As well as that, he'd had a very senior position in the CIA, working with Richard Helms, the man who kept all the secrets during the Kennedy assassination. He was involved in the 1960s in subverting, get this, and undermining, infiltrating student movements in Europe in the 1960s. So what kind of character was this to put in charge? Well, we're losing British control over London Underground at that crucial time. 2 of clubs, we got
Verint Systems. The software company has made once dumb cameras smart. Its technology is used by giant retailers.
This is an Israeli image recognition technology
to analyze customer movement as it's occurring in order to improve sales.
It was used on the London Underground.
That's an alert right there. That's an alert right there.
And all the CCTS cameras had various connections with other security firms to do with phone tapping and so on.
Verint system is only in its infancy.
People were very suspicious of how come we had this foreign company that had moved in to the London Underground just a year or 2 before, and what kind of role did it play?
Our job as a vendor is to provide solutions for them to really do the things that they need to do.
Part of the whole story of July 7th is the way all the CCTV switched off at the crucial time. It just wasn't functioning.
I would say the sky's the limit.
Just as it was with 9/11.
If Verint Systems were running everything during the London 7/7 bombings, Stagecoach, London Underground, and it all switched off on the bus and the Underground at the crucial times, then how is it that they didn't lose their contract, and how is it that they are still operating on London Transport to this day?
7 of clubs. HSBC Bank. What happened at Canary Wharf is the great mystery, because there were certainly reports going around, incidences such as assassinations, such as massive police presence, that went around in various reports, up to 19 of them, There was also a lock-in, including HSBC, where plenty of staff were locked in the premises. What on earth went on at Canary Wharf? There's been total denial. Senior management with HSBC and everybody who was locked in need to tell the truth and expose what happened.
Benjamin Netanyahu. He had been busy banging the drums for war with Iran, yes, even then, and he was in London for a conference, a big economic conference of Israel. He was warned just before he left his hotel not to go out that day because of what was about to happen. 6 minutes before, he received a warning. So then there was a lot of debate between Scotland Yard and Mossad who had given the warning first, okay? But this was fairly clarified by an interview with the head of Mossad in a German newspaper, clearly stating that they had advance information of this terror attack. We can't help noticing, making comparisons with the event of 9/11, where there was evidence for Israeli foreknowledge that could hardly be escaped.
Six of spades, the British press. Why won't they allow anything to challenge that narrative within the press? Where is the ethical side of our press at the moment? 52 people lost their lives, and where 4 alleged bombers were assassinated, almost certainly. It's just not good enough.
Stagecoach, this is our 10 of clubs. This was the bus depot where the 30 bus was residing the weekend before it blew up. And there was an anonymous but quite credible testimony posted on the Alex Jones Show, a website. 2 people who weren't normally there had spent the weekend going over doing maintenance work on this bus. And as we all know, on the day, oh, the CCTV mysteriously didn't work on that bus. Gosh, what a surprise. And then the top neatly lifted off, looking as if it had been cut round the end with some giant tin opener, a very level surface all along the top. And we could see in one corner where a bit of the top was hacked along, where it hadn't quite torn properly. That bus had been prepared for what happened to it, okay? And Stagecoach was the place where we believe that hanky-panky was done. Operation Atlantic Blue, in May of 2005, just months before the event. This was a huge terror drill with bombs simulated, with 3 bombs going off on undergrounds, synchronising with a major international summit. Well, how about that? It was a joint British-American terror drill, and all echelons of the British government were involved. Imagine an event where you have, for example, you have walking wounded being carried into hospitals, and you have some things really happening on the street, other things make-believe on computer screens. Imagination in preparation for the actual event. Okay, 9 of spades. This is Operation Hanover. This was a police terror drill, and it only came out at the inquest. We didn't know about it before, and it was just the very beginning of July 2005, and it was 3 bombs going off. It was a 3-fold event in central London, and the police had to have a terror drill responding to it. Gosh, fancy that. And at the inquest they explained that was why they're so well prepared for the July 7th bombing, because they'd rehearsed something like it the week before. They didn't seem to see anything very suspicious about this. Excellent bit of research by the July 7th truce team in London, and it was about at least the 4th major terror drill rehearsal before the actual event happened. Rudolph Giuliani. What was he doing in London? What was he doing in England? Oh, he was having breakfast just at Liverpool Street Hotel when the bombs went off right underneath him. Gosh, didn't something similar happen a few years ago when he just happened to be at Ground Zero, Building 7, when the whole thing blew up, and he suddenly started managing the whole of Ground Zero as the mayor of New York. Did a fine job of stopping photographers being allowed to photograph Ground Zero, basically fencing it all off. Nobody did more for the official story at 9/11 than Giuliani. So fancy that, he's over here, maybe something to do with his security firm, helping his friend Benjamin Netanyahu with the conference, but he's a key character. And the day before, what was he doing? The day before July 7th, well, fancy that, he was up north giving a lecture to some police group, telling them how great the war on terror was, and how lucky it was that we had tough people like Blair and Bush to cope with the war on terror. So somehow he's a very key operator, and who knows, maybe he pressed the buttons.
You know, you're really beautiful. And a woman that looks like that has to have her own special scent.
Oh, thank you. Maybe you could tell me what you think of this scent. Oh, you dirty boy! You, oh! Donald, I thought you were a gentleman.
the Jaguar at Luton. It's a sensational discovery made during the inquest by the July 7th Truth team. When three of them, they arrived at Luton station, okay, they parked. Then they had to meet up with Jermaine Lindsay, who's coming out from Aylesbury, and just as Jermaine Lindsay's car came in the car park, the exact moment you see a very posh Jaguar. Its lights go on, and it comes round to park together with, so the three cars all park together. And just the exact second they all park together, the CCTV switch is off. When the lads had a so-called dummy run, or a practice run, on the 28th of June, the week before, they showed that Jaguar was also there in the same spot. So it was somebody, a minder, who was there to meet those lads, and probably they all got out, he gave them their rucksacks that they had to carry. They thought they were on some sort of terror drill adventure going up to London that day, and so the four lads met up with this guy who got out the Jaguar, and this is an amazing sort of concealed part of the whole story, because when patsies are set up for these kind of fabricated events, they do have minders who look after them. Now, 7 of Diamonds, we've got Ephraim Halevi, a former head of Mossad, and his article about the London bombings appeared in the Jerusalem Post just a couple of hours or so after the event. That was so quick, and it appeared very knowledgeable about the event. For example, it referred to the synchronous bombings in London, when it was actually a couple of days before journalists learned that the bombings were synchronous. The initial story was they went off at different times, and he discussed Tavistock Square, he discussed how it was near to where the Zionist Foundation was in Great Russell Street. So he seemed to know, and he also discussed rules for waging a Third World War. Well, gosh, fancy that. So it was a Third World War was in process, a whole world war, and it was a spiritual war against Muslims and against terrorism, and it's not the sort of thing you just brew up. The whole thing had the air of being pre-written, and especially he said yesterday's bombing, so-and-so, as if you were expecting it to go into print in a newspaper the next day, as it normally would on the 8th of July. So it had very much the air of being pre-written, and a lot of controversy was stirred up by that, and they soon took it off their website because it was a bit too disturbing that they knew too much. What were the bombs? What was the explosive? That was the mystery, and the stories we were given kept getting sillier and sillier. To start with, it was C4, that's in all the films about, it's a NATO high-powered explosive, and real experts said they thought there were traces of something that might have looked like C4, which is a military-grade explosive around the trains. That was the first story, okay? Within a week, the suicide bomber started to develop. They were up in Leeds, and it was something called TATP. What was that? Well, it was a detonative explosive, and they were supposed to brood it up in the bath with a bit of sulfuric acid, a bit of acetone, and of course a bit of hydrogen peroxide. Hydrogen peroxide always figures in these daft home terror stories we're given, and it was chemically totally impossible. Wherever they thought they got peroxide from, you cannot buy strong or concentrated peroxide, and no, you can't concentrate it by boiling it up in a saucepan, okay? So that got ridiculed for a year or two, and then by the big trial in 2008, lo and behold, TATP had disappeared entirely, and we got instead, it was black pepper and peroxide. You mix black pepper and peroxide, and where did they get the idea of black pepper and peroxide? Well, if you remember, you probably don't, but there was a 21st July story which was chapati flour and peroxide, and the lawyers successfully got these guys in jail for 40 years with chapati flour and peroxide as their sort of mock bombs that didn't go bang. So a sort of analogy was made from those to black pepper and peroxide, and that is the last final story. And so then the inquest had to try and allege that they had black pepper and peroxide traces found in the bomb factory in 18 Alexander Grove. If you believe that, you believe anything. The Edgware Road underground train. It was ascertained this had 3 large holes in its floor. The damage did not resemble that from a rucksack within the coach. No, it resembled something much more underneath the coach, with metal bent upwards. A whole lot of harrowing accounts of survivors in the dark coming across those 3 different holes. Obviously the official inquest didn't want to say that, but It's quite clear from their story that we've got major experience of different holes in that Edgware Road train, and with people falling into the holes, terrible accounts of them falling into the car. One of them, somebody dies in a hole. But you've got a story utterly and forever incompatible with a single suicide bomber. Force Reconnaissance Regiment. This was a newly set up branch of the British Army, a bit like the SAS. It's quite secretive, but it turned up in the de Menzies story. There was an FRR sort of secret agent, and they appear as seconded over from Ireland. Their bomb-making skills, very secretive, and really quite above the law. When the Canary Wharf stories were coming in, the people being shot at Canary Wharf, was this the FRR that had done this? It did look rather like it, and then they turned up some months later in Basra, in Iraq. They were in disguise, and they were planning to set off some bombs in a mosque, looking like an Arabs had done it. And they were very, very important, these people. Immediately they were arrested, they were busted out from their prison in Basra, and we never even told their names or anything. These are people above the law, and I think they are quite highly suspect for the actual perpetrators of the London bombings. Okay. Now, our summer 52 breaks down into you get 6 at Edgware Road and 7 at Aldgate. Pathologist swore that he had reliably counted those number of dead bodies. The problem the inquest had was that those dead bodies are totally accounted for by real human victims. What that means is there isn't one left over who could be the terrorist. There's may remind you of 9/11, those who went into it, where the numbers of dead on the airplane did not allow any extras for the alleged Muslims that were supposed to be on board. How did they get round it? They said, oh, Tenware, Tango got blown into 52 little bits, and we got DNA samples of all these packages of what used to be Tenware. And this is something similar for Khan, supposedly on the Edgware Road, you know, totally invisible, no physical trace of him. And they said, oh, we got blown into so many bits that the pathologist couldn't see a body remaining. That is just their attempt to count. We got another 13 at Tavistock Square, and there again, that number seemed rather preordained. Now, the initial report in the afternoon was about 3 bodies. 3. The evening paper then had, I think, about 9, and the next day it went up to 13. Bear in mind that all bodies were removed about midday from Tavistock Square.
What is the most ridiculous thing that the government are expecting us to believe, and that the British public are so gullible that they actually believe it?
Well, for me personally, after rummage around this whole story, I would say it's the idea that those 4 ordinary, normal, fun-loving lads were turned into suicide bombers. I mean, they were cricket fanatics, they'd rap about their latest trainer shoes and were they going to get into the local college, who was saving up to, or training to drive a car. I mean, that was what they'd talk about, and they had no dark side, they had no despair, no particular interest in politics. And they'd go and visit their relatives in Pakistan. They didn't go to terror training camps, for God's sake. Just part of their culture. I think the desperate, convoluted efforts to find some terroristic side is just MI5 fabrications. There's loads of fabrication, but they were just ordinary, normal lads, and they were deeply, utterly clueless about how to make explosives. I mean, there's absolutely no reason to believe that.
Absolutely.
A clue about how to put a bomb together.
We've had something like this. There's no normality other than the new normality that follows.
Hey Belinda, Jack of Hearts. Wonderful these glasses, by the way.
Oh, good.
David Shaler, what's become of him? Is he? Some people have heard it said he's still an MI5, even though he was a whistleblower.
No, he lived with me for 2 years, so I know him about as well as anybody. And in fact, he used to have a joke that when he was living in my house, if people he heard rumours that he might be working for MI5, he said the only person in this house still working for MI5 is Eddie the cat.
Eddie the cat?
Yeah.
And that's Sheila's cat?
Yes.
Eddie, come here. Eddie, there's a good boy. So Nick, this morning when we went to Hyde Park, we covered 39 steps, we did the 3 sweets. We did spades, we did clubs, we did diamonds, we didn't do the hearts. What our heart should be with the truth movement on the London bombings. Who should we feel for, and who is praiseworthy for what they've done in order to expose
Well,
them?
to start off, we have to commiserate with those victims. 52 of them suddenly had their lives taken away.
Can't argue with that.
And the families aren't told a lot about it.
Yeah. And I suppose many of them still believe the lie, really.
That's what we're told by them.
And they've never really had satisfaction with the proper inquiry that they called for, have they?
Absolutely
so
not.
Certainly all hearts must go out to them, I entirely agree. The King of Hearts, what did he name? Mohammed Siddiqui Khan?
Khan, yeah. Shazad Tanweer.
Asub Hussain?
Asub Hussain and Jermaine Lindsay.
Jermaine Lindsay. Well, yeah, I can't disagree with that. They were assassinated, I believe. They certainly weren't the perpetrators.
No. They somehow knew each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they've had all their life stories taken away and a British intelligence narrative put instead about who they are.
Yeah. And blamed in the process.
Blamed, yeah.
So 10 of Hearts, Nick.
Next, maybe another innocent young man cut down in his prime. A couple of weeks later, Charles de Menezes, a Brazilian electrician, Stockwell tube station, cold-blooded murder, another police killing. And a whole pack of lies told all around it. Nothing they said initially was true, and the perpetrators seemed to get promoted. Nobody's found guilty.
That was on the 22nd of July, 2005, and 8 days later. It was covered up by and large. There was nobody prosecuted for the cold-blooded assassination. They put bullets in his head inside the tube. Total cover-up.
Yeah.
So our hearts must go out to him and his family. What about the 9 of Hearts then?
Well, perhaps generally all the families of all these victims had to suffer in silence without much explanation, without being given any adequate inquest.
They've called for that, though, haven't they? Notwithstanding the fact that they've lost their loved ones, they've never had justice. The 8 of Hearts.
Thousands of people may get killed, but the whole civilization is ruined by British-American aggression, and it's justified by this phony, fake war on terror narrative.
Yeah. And these aren't the extremists we're talking about, the Taliban or whatever. These are innocent women and children and citizens in Iraq and Afghanistan who've had their lives in Libya, Syria, who've had their lives decimated as a result of our aggressive foreign policy agenda. So our hearts go out to our brothers and sisters elsewhere in the East.
Amen.
7 of Hearts, Nick.
Coming back to what happened after the July 7th event, a truth campaign was started up by some people, and they put up a great website, and they put up a huge amount of information.
It's a fabulous resource, that. So anybody who doubts what we've been saying can really go to that website as a first port of call, as an excellent database where they can get the full story with all the evidence about the inquests, about the families, about the victims. It really is a tremendous effort by them. It's a very praiseworthy resource that helps expose or get to the closest to the truth than we've got so far. 6 of Hearts, Nick.
Let's name all the marvellous videos that have been made about 7/7 that have been watched all around the world. Mind the Gap, for example. Then there was Terror Storm, Alex Jones did.
What about
that Ludicrous Diversion, that was a good one as well.
Yeah.
They were the early ones.
That was fine one. Early ones, yeah.
And then...
probably the Ripple Effect.
7/7 Ripple Effect by Boad did. That was quite controversial, wasn't it?
Probably that's the most popular one.
But there's been some other good ones that have extended it a bit further, haven't they? With, Tom Sacker's 2 films, for instance, the
Seeds of Deconstruction,
and
quite long. If you got a couple of, you have to have a couple of hours to watch it. A few hours.
Yeah, but it puts 7/7 in a wider geopolitical context,
I suppose so,
as well as Crime and Prejudice, which is his latest film, exposes some of the sinister aspects of the intelligence and security services and how intelligence assets are handled. So it's quite a spooky film in one sense, but an excellent narrated film. Keelan Balderston's work on 7/7 Big Picture.
Yeah.
I like the way Keelan poses some very awkward questions that demand answers. These films that we're talking about will never be shown on mainstream media. What about Richard D. Hall with his programmes?
Yeah, very courageous. Yeah. Sky 201. Yeah.
You've been on his show, haven't you?
Yeah, and there's a Media Edge on Sky 200.
Yeah. Tony Gosling, he was prominent in the truth movement in the early days, wasn't he? The 5 of Hearts is next, Nick.
John Anthony Hill, who called himself Murd Dib.
So why did they put him in prison?
Because they didn't want him wandering around the inquest and getting interest from journalists. And he was also put in jail for the previous, if you remember, the second so-called July 7th trial. And let's point out that when did he first make the film? Was it 2007? His intuition about the story, that's the all-important thing. Right. Those lads got up to London, trains were delayed, they got up too late, and then they rushed off to Canary Wharf. That was quite intuitive at the time. And since then, that is more and more looking like the only story that's still up and running, and has been gradually confirmed by a lot more information. And a complete contrast with all the other films we mentioned, which discuss the evidence and discuss what happened and point out criticism of the official story. Whereas the Ripple Effect doesn't do any of those. It simply tells a narrative story unfold.
That's a different one.
That's what is needed. A plausible narrative story. Number 4, I put the one and only British Muslim who's spoken out in public to get words of truth about July the 7th. On the whole, I think the British Muslims are very sadly silent on this one, and they have large meetings to accept the government story. They're guilty. And Dr. Nassim, the wise old cleric of the Birmingham Mosque, he's put in his journal words of truth, and he's had meetings, words of truth at the Birmingham Mosque, and nearly everyone there agrees with him.
Yeah.
With this alternative and more truthful narrative.
You've got the 2 of Hearts.
Well, I guess it has to be you, Tony. I mean, you stood up for telling what was what, and you got chucked out of the police force, and that had a terrific shock, inspirational effect all around the world.
I don't think there's room for me, because I think that, quite frankly, what you've done in writing this is, to my mind, the equivalent of the Bible of the London bombings. You want to know what's happened in relation to that, people need to get hold of Terror on the Tube. And this is a wonderful piece of work, and I congratulate you on it, and it's been very influential in me over since the light came to me on this.
Yeah, well, thank you, Tony. I came from being with all the wonderful people in the London's 9/11 Truth Movement, and also the July 7th Truth Movement, and sort of working with them over years, that I was able to put things together in this.
The problem is here, Nick, though, we can't both give the 2 of Hearts. There's only one of us on the card. Yeah. I'll tell you what, Nick, we're going to toss.
For the last position?
For the last position.
Okay, right.
Now, why am I doing that? I mean, you did 30 heads, didn't you? You're going to call heads again?
Well, one more go, right.
You're going to call heads?
Let's see.
Heads or tails? It's with a silver coin this time.
I go tails this time.
You're going to go tails?
Yeah.
Heads! I've got it, Nick.
Okay,
you're off the list.
One, Tony. Right.
All right. So my joker in the pack, out of all of this, is 9/11 and the 9/11 connection. And I think it's high time that the British public came to their common senses and woke up to the corruption in US government and also British government.
Tonight's exercise was plausible, but it was, of course, fictional. But it's hard to see how the government can do anything other than educate us and prepare. There's no room for excuses. We have, of course, been warned.
I think we can say no more.
It's 10 years after the event. We still haven't got a single politician in this country who's prepared to tell the truth about 9/11, have we?